Welcome to the Leadership with Biana Kovic Show, and thank you for being with us. Our topic, leadership, focuses on leaders such as yourselves. We believe that leadership is a skill that can be learned through practice and awareness. It is our hope that our conversation will help you become more reflective when it comes to your own leadership practices and enable you to leave a positive legacy. Our very special guest is Michael Akinyele. Michael is the Acting VA Chief Innovation Officer and Executive Director of the VA Innovation Center. Michael is a turnaround expert, healthcare futurist, and a collaborative leader. Away from his work at the VA, Michael is the managing principal of independent advisory firm he founded in 2016. Michael is also a member of the board of the Lymphoma Research Foundation. He earned his Master's of Business Administration from Stanford Graduate School of Business. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Biana. Thanks for having me on the show.
Michael, I'm very excited to have you on the show. As I mentioned, you are Acting VA Chief Innovation Officer and Executive Director of the VA Innovation Center. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your work and about the VA Innovation Center.
Absolutely. A lot of my work is focused on understanding how to address the most persistent and systemic issues affecting VA and our veterans. I'm able to do that through the VA Innovation Center, primarily because the Mission Act that was enacted June of 2018 included a provision that authorized the creation of a Center for Innovation for Care and Payment. And the purpose of that center that's authorized by the Mission Act is to understand how VA can redefine, redesign, and implement new approaches to service delivery and payments with the purpose of reducing overall expenditure without harming or reducing the quality of those services or payments. And so a lot of the work I've been doing over the last year has been working across the agency and others to set the stage for how we establish the center and its operations and how we carry out the mission of the center, which is to design and test pilot programs that will ultimately redefine and redesign how we deliver services and how we pay for services.
And for the folks who are not familiar, the President Trump has signed the VA Mission Act back in 2018.
Absolutely. So the president signed the Mission Act on June 6th of 2018. Our center is established with the authority in Section 152 of the Mission Act, and our objective is to submit our first pilot program proposal with a waiver request to Congress by December 6th of 2019.
So you mentioned the Section 152 of the Mission Act, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about it.
Absolutely. Section 152 of the Mission Act authorized the creation of a Center for Innovation for Care and Payment. And our work with the center has a couple of nuances. So the first nuance is that we are only able to run 10 pilot programs concurrently with a funding limit of $50 million to be expended in any single fiscal year in support of these pilot programs. I think what excites me the most about the authority in Section 152 is not only that our mission is squarely focused on creating value for our veterans and the agency, but it's also that we've been granted the authority to request waivers to things that are in statute. And from a white space thinker like myself, that's extremely exciting because it's the opportunity to design new approaches to care delivery and new approaches to alternative payment methodology without the express constraint of everything that's written into the Code of Federal Regulations. Because we do have the opportunity to make the business case and to do some early impact analysis to demonstrate why it might be more effective to deliver services or pay for services in a different way than what's currently restricted by law. And so the waiver authority plus the funding plus the mission of value creation are the three elements that excite me the most in Section 152 of the Mission Act. And we're very excited to hopefully in a couple of months announce to the public what some of our initial initiatives are under the authority granted by the Mission Act, Section 152.
And for me, what you do is such an honorable work because you're looking to provide the best services for our nation heroes, which they all deserve.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of our work is really focused on how we can get the highest quality services to our veterans. They are our nation's heroes, and they deserve nothing but the best.
And obviously, not only veterans, but also their families, right?
Absolutely. And I would even expand it. When we think about our mission statement is from President Lincoln, to care for him who have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan. And that really sort of expands, at least from my perspective, those who we are supposed to serve and care for. And when we think about those who have borne the battle, it's really looking at those who have experienced the physical harm of war as well as the emotional harm of war. And the emotional harm goes beyond just thinking about folks who might have seen things or heard things from direct exposure, but it actually extends to the spouse or the child who ultimately has a spouse that's not available for important milestones in their life and other things like that. And those emotional harms and emotional scars actually cut deep, because when folks do return from being away, integration or reintegration is typically a challenge. And that challenge from a transition standpoint also occurs when folks separate from military. So it's really important to take a step back and think holistically about what it means to bear the burden of battle, not just from the individuals that go out, but the burden that's being borne by those that they leave behind here in the United States. And so our effort is really looking at going beyond meeting the needs and solving the problems of the men and women who have served in active duty and are now veterans, but actually looking to those who they're connected to who are on that journey with them, and really understanding what we can do to help improve their health and well-being.
Interesting. And I greatly appreciate that you talked about mental health piece. And also, we all know about post-traumatic stress disorder, that it's not something that you can heal overnight. So what are the initiatives, I'm not sure if you can even talk about it, but what are the initiatives that would cover that piece of post-traumatic stress disorder or mental health piece?
So you are right. I'm not at liberty to discuss some of our projects that we haven't publicly announced. But what I will say is that, suicide prevention is the number one clinical priority of the agency. And when we think about all the drivers that lead up to suicide or suicidal ideation, I think there's a lot more to be learned in that space. And I'm a fundamental believer in spending as much time as possible understanding sort of problems and the root causes of those problems before you sort of leapfrog into trying to design solutions. I think what happens often is there are either knee-jerk reactions or a focus on some of the surface level symptoms of problems, and folks immediately start working on solving those symptoms. And years after, hundreds of millions of dollars after, discover that the solution they implemented had no impact. Since our funding is from the taxpayer and it is our responsibility to be judicious, it's really important to take a step back, make sure we have enough insight into what the root causes of some of these problems are. And when you mention PTSD and mental health, I think there's a lot more we need to learn, and looking at how either by understanding the experience and exposure during military life that causes or has a higher impact on getting folks traumatized, and understanding how some of those experiences can be mitigated or potentially attended to as they occur, versus having folks go through so much trauma and then only when they transition out of the military would we start taking a look at addressing those. So there's an element of, if we do understand there might be an opportunity to intervene in real time as the traumatic events occur, understanding if there are opportunities to deploy the appropriate interventions to mitigate long-term harm. But I would say from where we sit in the VA, it's definitely outside of our purview, but we do have many collaborative efforts with the Department of Defense, and I'm sure others that are actively working in that space are likely exploring some of these avenues. But we in the Innovation Center, again, we're still very much in our startup phase, still establishing operations, and at some point we'll roll out and announce publicly what some of our initiatives are.
So, when I think about veterans, I think about leaders in action. What are the traits that you think that leader needs to have to be a truly successful leader?
The one thing I think is critical to anyone leading an effort or group is someone who has a vision of where and what needs to happen, where they need to go and what needs to happen for the team to get there. The next part would be someone who has a plan. So with that vision of where the team ultimately needs to go or where the work ultimately needs to go, the second capability is the capability to actually put a plan in place to get there. And when that plan is put in place, the elements that drive towards a successful outcome come in various forms, but a key part of that is the people who are part of that team. And it's the function of the role of the leader to actually understand the capabilities of the team members and make some hard decisions about if the capabilities of the members of the team are appropriate to implement a plan to meet the vision. If a leader is in a position to redesign the team in order to optimize the plan and related objectives, then that's the best case scenario. But I think leaders sometimes have their hands tied, and you ultimately have to make do with the capabilities that are in the people on your team. And what you have to do in that scenario as a good leader would be to understand how best the individuals on the team can contribute and to put them in positions to be successful, always moving forward with implementing the plan. And the sign of true leadership is when all roles have been assigned and those gaps still exist, it's being able to ask for help from additional resources. And if those additional resources are not available, then I think ultimately it's the responsibility of the leader to take on those gaps and to directly fulfill those gaps versus kind of just sitting back, folding arms and saying, well, it can't be done. I don't have the right people or I don't have all the resources I need. I think the leader is the person or persons really focused on just working the plan and getting that vision realized. And as long as it's feasible, putting on the work on their shoulders to get it done. And I think that is one thing that makes the example of our military and our veterans fairly obvious from a leadership standpoint, because those are heroes that kind of go out and just get things done, whether or not the resources are available or they're in the best position, or even if they don't necessarily have the right team or skill sets, they push through and they get things done and often sacrifice their lives in the process. So it's definitely a great honor working on their behalf for their good. And so when I think about leadership and when I think about what drives and motivates me to come to work and push to improve their healthcare and well-being, it's knowing that they've already done that work. And now it's on me to continue to forge ahead for their betterment.
I really appreciate that you're talking about leaders that are not only driving the team, but also taking on some of the team's responsibilities if need be. What are your advice for those leaders that feel that their job is just to supervise?
My advice to leaders everywhere or folks who desire to lead is that the most effective approach is to lead by example. And it's really not about leading by instruction or directive, because even if folks fall in line, the best you're going to get is compliance. It's hard to get motivated, passionate team members who don't see enough in their leader to know that their leader is working through the issues with them. And so a lot of this comes down to the type of culture and environment that the leader wants to promote. I think the phrase is the tone starts from the top. And so leaders, I believe, to be effective, need to have a mindset that is about leading by example. And then that encourages team members to follow suit. And there are times where you may not have the right team members, and it should be in the purview of the leader to recognize that and recognize that sometimes adjustments need to be made. But ultimately, if on average you've hired the right team or you've been given the right team, the best approach to leading that team is by example.
And what I'm hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the situation might never be perfect in terms of dynamic of having the exact right team members, right, with exact right qualifications. So you will always have to sort of work with whatever you have and model behavior that you want to see in your team.
I would agree with that. In my almost 2 decades of professional experience and all the different teams I've worked with and teams I've led, I don't recall one scenario where the team had all the different capabilities that was necessary to get the job done. We always had to make some adjustment. And the best leaders that I worked with were quick to recognize that. And when I've been in a position of leadership, I've been quick to recognize that and make the adjustments.
So recognizing it on the spot and making immediate adjustments with something that will get you sort of to finish the job.
Yes. And maybe not immediate, maybe it's essentially as soon as possible, because it takes a while to gather enough information and data points to come up with an objective perspective. But after you've done it a couple of times, that cycle time is shortened and you don't need as much information in order to make the decisions about how to align the team members towards the plan and how to actually realize the vision that's been set out.
I'd like to segue and talk a little bit about stress and work performance. Some leaders who were guests on my show spoke about the importance of a stress-free environment in the workplace. However, in New York, that's less and less to find. What are your thoughts on that?
It depends on the temperament and personality of the team members. So some folks are able to thrive in high stress situations and fast moving situations, but not everyone does well in those situations. I think there are folks who literally shut down. There's some research coming out, though, that being in a perpetual state of high stress is actually fairly toxic to your health care and well-being. And so it would be important to understand the downside risk of executing in that state of stress and really understanding what the trade-offs are between getting the job done and reducing the life outcomes and quality of life of the team. And so I could put it as, while it's possible to execute in high stress situations, it may not be advisable, even if you're capable of executing in that scenario.
Would you say that it can cause some form of PTSD?
It can. And there are industries that are high intensity industries. You reference New York, so you can take the financial services sector, where there has been several instances of folks who, when they're done with their careers in financial services, have actually had to go into therapy as a result of some of those experiences between the tight deadlines and some of the sort of high intense negotiations and high impact of mistakes that are made. So you can think of a junior analyst working on a financial model who misstates an entry that translates to hundreds of millions of dollars being lost when the transaction is executed. The pressure I think some of those folks are under potentially gets too much in some of those scenarios. I think others have experienced extremely long working hours and just things that, like I referenced earlier, even though we are capable of doing, may not actually be the best when you think about health and well-being.
So what are the ways that one can bring balance into one's life if the work environment is not providing one with that?
I think one of the key ways is setting boundaries, and that's hard typically for people like myself or people that I guess folks consider type A, because it's like you're always on, you're always working to get something done. And sometimes most of that is related to work and not the life of your ecosystem or your ethos. And so it's really challenging, but I think ultimately it starts with creating those boundaries and understanding that there will be more to do the next day. And a mentality of trying to get everything done on one day is just not sustainable. There will always be more to do. And so creating the boundaries either by setting those time blocks of when work gets done, and then making sure if you have a family, kind of having that time in there to spend with them as part of your non-work efforts, and then giving back to community, participating and volunteering, I think are all the different activities one can do outside of work to try and create that balance. It always comes with a sense that the time you're spending and the efforts you're putting in are to benefit someone else and to really potentially improve their health and well-being. At least for me, I find that helps me create balance. And then it's also good that the work I do at the VA is mission-oriented, and it's driven to ultimately improve the health and well-being of our nation's heroes. And so I look at my life as having almost the best of both worlds, where my work, it's really focused on improving the lives of our nation's heroes. So the hours I spend on that, I can always connect my efforts to that ultimate outcome. And then outside of work, between spending time with my family, spending time in my community, at church, and even with my service on the board of the Lymphoma Research Foundation, I know all of that work is to benefit others and to really improve their health and well-being. And so for me, it's efforts at work, outside of work, really targeting improving the health and well-being of others.
That's very interesting. It seems to me you're very intentional in terms of what are your core values and whether or not your life is aligned with your core values.
Yeah. So my father passed away in 2014 from, I guess you can call it a medical event. And it was a moment of reset, if you will, where the death of a loved one translates to a moment of reflection and self-assessment and realignment of purpose. And so since then, I think I've been making career decisions and prioritizing my activities to ensure that I'm working towards the legacy that I want my life to stand for. And that's a legacy of service and a legacy of transforming systems and organizations so that they are more effective and they're actually working to improve the lives that they're supposed to serve.
And for the folks that are still searching what is their legacy, what advice would you give them? How would they tap into that, something that is so meaningful for them to find that path of creating legacy like you are doing?
Each individual would need to understand what their priorities are. And so part of my process or exercise was really thinking fast forward to, if I make it to 70, what would I want to be surrounded with and what would I want to be said about me at that point in my life? And so really figuring out what I need to accomplish now to kind of put me on that path to having some of those things said about me at that point is really driving some of the decisions I'm making today, because a lot of my effort looks beyond just the 5 years to 10-year horizon, but actually tries to link it with where I'm ultimately trying to get to.
So you're a very reflective leader.
Absolutely.
And any thoughts on how curiosity, when you're a reflective leader, can help your leadership?
I think curiosity is a useful tool or perspective, and it enables me to think beyond traditional approaches or traditional views. It allows me to ultimately look at where I'm trying to go or what I'm trying to accomplish, and then try and come up with a plan without the constraints of how things have been done before, or how I would just need to improve certain things. It's really a take a step back, think in an expanded way about where you're trying to go and the different ways you can get there. And I think curiosity helps with that process, because if there is a lack of curiosity, then it's less about the ultimate destination and potentially more about just taking blueprints of what others have done and then just trying to apply it to your life, which doesn't always work.
And also what I'm hearing is take a step back, see a broader and wider picture.
Yes.
And what does stepping back do for one who's making decisions?
I think it allows you to put the immediate decision or choice in the context of a lot of other things. I think when making a decision about a specific thing in a specific instance, we tend to get fixated on that instance or that specific decision versus actually looking beyond that, either looking ahead, so looking out 5 or 10 years, or looking at other things outside of that vertical of that decision. So you can think of it as, if I needed to make a decision about a project or a decision about something on the professional scene, and I didn't take the time to look at the impact on my family or the impact on the work I'm doing in the community or the impact on other things that are happening in tangent or parallel. And if I also didn't take the time to look out 5 or 10 years on the impact of that decision, I wouldn't be doing myself any favors. So it helps me to take a step back and understand all of those connecting points and dependencies so that when I do make a decision, it's with all of those things being considered, and there are fewer things that end up being a surprise after the decision is made and whatever the thing is implemented.
And I really appreciate, because you mentioned the word impact. And that is a very important word, because we do want to ensure that our actions and our words do have a positive impact on our communities and our lives, right?
Yes, purpose, impact are two things that drive me. It's about the purpose in the work that I do and the life that I'm leading. And ultimately, it's that purpose translating to meaningful impact in my life and the lives of others. Time is short that we have on this earth. And so my goal is to try and make sure that either impacting the lives of others, impacting my life, that my effort is generating positive impacts.
Any final thoughts?
I would say that our efforts today at the VA Innovation Center are really looking at how we lead our agency to meet the needs of our veterans, not just today or in the near term, but actually when we look out and recognize the changing demographics of our veteran population, we understand that with the increase in our women veteran population, we would need to deliver services differently to meet their needs. We also recognize that with the significant declines in our veteran population, we will also need to rethink how we deliver services. And starting today or starting now, to really think 20, 25 years out about how we need to operate to meet some of the changing demographic changes and some of the changing population changes is really where we think we add the most value to the agency and where we hope to help leadership across the agency by testing some of these ideas and really identifying what the most impactful solutions are, so that as they're working to operate, we're really looking ahead and understanding how we can help.
And Michael, how can people contact you or obviously learn about your office?
One of the easiest ways to contact us is either through social media or our email, which is innovation@va.gov. But the most effective way, I think, to really stay connected with our progress is to bookmark our website, which is www.innovation.va.gov, and also follow us on social media @VA Innovation.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for being a guest, and thank you for the work that you do with the VA office.
Thanks, Biana. Appreciate it.
Our special guest was Michael Akinyele, Acting VA Chief Innovation Officer and Executive Director of the VA Innovation Center. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Leadership with Biana Kovic Show. Remember that you're all leaders in your own rights, and the impact that you're meant to achieve starts with small acts of kindness, curiosity, and generosity. Please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you again, and until next time.